Now I've gotten to a point today where, I want to use that ability to teach improv, teach musical theory things to people as therapy to, it's not, I don't want to call it a distraction, but it's a happy distraction, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, a distraction is a distraction no matter how we try to cover it up.
Because music has so much to it. Right. And that's it really.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. I hope everybody's doing well. This morning or this afternoon, I want to share with some folks here about anticipatory grief. And I'm going to share it from my experience, and I know you're going to probably hear it a lot from many of the other participants who are speaking here today. Anticipatory grief is when you have a loved one who may have a terminal illness or even a chronic illness sometimes, and even the elderly, okay? It's when you have the participation of grief, of loss, death. And a lot of times, many of us became caregivers. So we as caregivers, caring for our loved one, deal with anticipatory grief. But we have to remember that those loved ones that we have anticipatory grief with, they are also dealing with grief because they know they're dying. My son knew, but for a good 21 years, I still took care of him. I made sure he went to school every day. He was very intelligent. So even if the disease was taking his body away, mentally he was very strong, brilliant. I'm saying brilliant, and he was. But he even knew what was going to happen. And I think there were many times he was very depressed about it because he had high goals. He had dreams of getting married and having children. I wanted him to finish college. He was able to come in with very large scholarships and grants because he had a very high GPA. But it was like every time he went into the hospital for something, he had some extra weakness that came home. And eventually couldn't use his legs, couldn't use his arms. At some point, he couldn't even use his hands. And I had to put the mouse directly over his one finger. So he had that one finger that he can use with the mouse. So every time something happened and he ended up in the hospital, he was angry because he knew when he came back, he would lose the ability to do something. So as his caregiver, I did what I can to provide him what he needed. But at the same time, I'm sure he had internally his struggles. I had my struggles. I mean, I became very depressed. And unfortunately, and I'm going to acknowledge this and own up to it and be accountable for it. But I feel like when I look back, that in a sense I was being selfish. My son needed all the care he needed, all the love he needed. But I think sometimes we as caregivers, we put so much into our loved ones, their care, their doctor's appointments, when they're sick in the hospital, making sure their beds are clean, making sure they have all the supplies and equipment they need, and dealing with pharmacies, dealing with insurance. Anybody who had to deal with anticipatory grief, with dealing with someone who has a terminal illness and is more likely is gonna die soon, you go through that. And a lot of times our health, grief affects your health, whether it's before the death or after, no matter what, grief will affect your health. And this is why I try to, especially when I'm speaking in the muscular dystrophy community, this is why I, and I know now there's several others also, try to encourage to make sure that you take care of yourself first. Because if you're sick and in your hospital, that's no good for your child or your husband or your wife or your parents or whoever you're a caregiver to. They need you. I also did 5 years of taking care of a lady with Alzheimer's. And now, I'm not really his caregiver, but I've been helping his daughter because she lives in California, help take care of things. And now I'm caring for Judy's ex-husband. And it's really sad because these people become like your family. Because after I lost Timothy, I felt like I lost my family. And when these people took me in and I was there to help with Judy, take care of the house, take care of the yard, I was given of myself. And as caregivers, we do this. But we do this mostly with people we know who are going to pass away soon. There was no doubt that this disease, Alzheimer's, was going to take Judy. We knew that. And there was no doubt that we knew that the muscular dystrophy was going to take my son. There's no doubt about that. We just didn't know when. We never know when it happens. And Timothy, 1 month before his 25th birthday. My dad, my stepmother, who went through the anticipatory grief as a caregiver, who took care of my dad. And you're going to hear people who take care of children with cancer or a family member with cancer. It's there. We're all caregivers, but at the same time, we deal with anticipatory grief. And it's much harder when it's somebody you love very much. But I also suggest it because I did a podcast on this last summer. When you're dealing with anticipatory grief, remember you as a caregiver are not the only one who's dealing with anticipatory grief. You have to remember that the loved one that you were caring for, who may still have their whole mind, they know. When I first started, I know Timothy knew. And that's why a lot of times I had to take him for therapy. He had a lot of anger. He had a lot of anger, not because of the disease that was affecting his body. He had a lot of anger towards his father, who pretty much abandoned him and rejected him. And for Timothy, that's not who he is. That is not who he was. And it's just sad. When I took care of Judy, when I first started taking care of her, She knew she had Alzheimer's. Just a few years earlier, she was taking care of her mother, who also had Alzheimer's and passed away. So that the anxiety comes in. There is an anxiety that goes on when you know something is going to happen to someone you love, but it affects you a lot. And then when you have the anxiety and the fear come in, you would know what's going to happen to your body, or even your mental or emotional state. It's not an easy thing. And we have to take care of ourselves. I remember 2 months before Timothy died, or less, when I was diagnosed with cancer, and I had to go in for emergency surgery, and they took everything out. And my son was petrified because he thought I was going to leave before him. He thought that he was going to be left alone, and he had this fear. He also had the fear because the one person who loved him the most, who cared for him the most, who was his best friend, who took him places, did things, may not be there. So that anxiety built up, and because the anxiety built up, the fear took over. And this is something we have to be cautious about, because if you let anxiety and fear steal you away from the person that you love and anybody else, then it defeats the purpose of why you are that parent or that daughter or whoever you're a caregiver that you're dealing the anticipatory grief with. Because I saw that even with Judy, she knew mentally, even if I was with the Alzheimer's, she still knew she was going to die. And she had a tremendous amount of anxiety, tremendous. And I had to find a way to calm her down. And with her daughter's help, we had to take her in to get something to calm her down. She knew she was going to die. She knew the disease was going to win. And anxiety and fear no longer exists once her mind was no longer controlling her body. Whether it's your child or your spouse or a parent, and no matter what it is that's affecting their minds or their bodies, be there for them. Be there for them, because they need you. And yes, we got to do all this stuff. And yes, we have to be part of all this. And yes, I know that anticipatory grief is the most hardening thing to go through. It is. So I want to share something with you that I found online. It is called internavo.com in their blog. And they talked about anticipatory grief. And I want to read real quick some of the things that they suggest that I also knew about. But sometimes it's good to review it. The most common symptoms of anticipatory grief is like grief that occurs after a loved one's death. Anticipatory grief has both mental and physical symptoms and can happen for many reasons. And it does, one of the things other than anxiety and the fear that comes in between all that is stress. Stress. And there's sadness. We can't control every aspect of our own lives, and we certainly can't control the death of those we love. Illnesses take flight. Tragedies occur. Things can happen. Things can change, and they change fast. And you may be experiencing the sadness surrounding the whole variety of things, and not being able to take your child to soccer, not being able to celebrate your wedding with your parents, or have them see your children grow up. You might be watching your best friend fade away and completely helpless. Those things are heartbreaking, and you are right to be sad about them. We have the right to feel sad about those we love, because then remember, all this, again, I bring it up again, there's fear. Fear is the root of anticipatory grief. Fear is the root of anticipatory grief. And we don't know what's going to happen on the other side of loss and grief for ourselves or for our loved ones. And every single loss is unique and different. And we can't pre-plan, even imagine what life would look like without them. I sort of knew what my life might be like after Timothy. I didn't know, though, I was going to be homeless. The year 2014, I had cancer. That's enough to put anxiety and fear and stress on anybody, whether you're a caregiver or whether you're the recipient of the illness. And then Timothy died suddenly. Even if we had all these years, we knew this was just suddenly. And because he died, that loss of income went away, and I could no longer live in that apartment. So I lost my home, and unfortunately, I had to lose my cat. And later on, I ended up losing my truck. It was like one thing after another that year. 2014 was the year of losses for me. But every single time, I found a way to get up, dust my knees, dust my legs, get the dirt and sand off of my hands, and move forward. I did not know where I was going or what I was going to do, but I had to move forward even with my grief. The very thing that Timothy feared about of going into the hospital was losing something that was part of him. And that time, that last time, the fear of losing something was his life. Was his life. And as his caregiver, but mostly as his mother, that guilt was there. I should have taken him home. I should have taken him home. I know probably it would not have changed anything, but I think he would rather have been at home than in the hospital. That was his fear. That was his stress. That was his anxiety. But all that I had as well. And my anticipatory grief changed from anticipatory grief to the loss. And even when Judy died, I was able to deal with it a lot easier and a lot better, even when my dad died, because of all the training and research I already did as a grief coach. I was able to embrace it and knew that this was meant to be. And I know some people don't want to hear that, don't want to know about it, and maybe you're not ready to hear it. That's okay. But when you experience that and you know that, then you know. My stepmom, who took care of my dad, and she worked as a nurse in a cardiologist's office. And she would come home, and unbelievable of seeing my dad slowly fading away to the point that he ended up in hospice. And I think he was in hospice no more than 2 days. He had like pneumonia, diabetes, cardiac issues. There was so much things. And I know with all that going on, I know that Diane was dealing with that anxiety, that stress, that fear. Even if she knew, even if we all knew, there's still that fear, that anxiety, and that stress that comes along with anticipatory grief. Because our anxiety is about our future. But we need to learn to take some deep breaths when anxiety feels overwhelming. And remember to talk to those around you. And when you ultimately talk to yourself, be kind to yourself. Give yourself the leeway to cycle through a variety of emotions about what is happening. And know that this anxiety won't always be there. And that its purpose now is showing you how deep the love and the connection that you have with that person. It's so true. It hits it right on the nail. So it's teaching us that when we go through that anxiety that's about the future is fueled by fear. And it's entirely reasonable. Change is generally sparks anxiety in most of us, and especially profound change like the death of a loved one who can be the tipping point. I always think of change as a good thing. When I changed my mindset and started thinking more positive and living more positive life, I no longer had the fear of change. I remember when I used to work in Florida Hospital, the billing and the change, the constant change, especially with Medicare, the constant change. And I hated, I hated change. But since then, I've learned that change is good. It is good. It has important values to it. It brings goodness if you allow it to. But if you allow fear to control and allow anxiety to control, then guess what? It defeats the purpose of what you need in your core, because you need to allow yourself to breathe and to accept. And I know easier said than done, but that's the reality of helping us deal with our anticipatory grief. And guess what? I hate bringing this up and saying this. But for all those years that I took care of my son and watched him suffer and watched his body deteriorate and watched losing my son fade away, I didn't want him to lose him, but my mind kept preparing me for it. And this funny thing is, my room would be on the total side of the house and his was on the other side. I could hear him calling me. And I would go running into his room. And I would say, "What do you need?" And he says, "I didn't call you." And then I said, "Oh, you're going crazy, Mom." But I heard him calling me. But when he passed away, I didn't go crazy. I didn't fall down and bawl and cry. I accepted it. I accepted that something good was going to happen, not only for him, but for me. And although I was grieving for my child, I still had to move forward. I still had to move forward. And loneliness. There's that fear of the loneliness. Actually, I I do have a fear of loneliness, but I accepted my loneliness as a part of who I am and where I am and my future goals of where and what I'm going to do. And although some of it never happened as much as I wanted to, God had a different calling for me. So now I'm doing whatever He wants me to do and like going crazy. Why can't I get a job? Why can't I go back into billing and collections? It was just like all these why questions why I couldn't do it. But yet anything to help people, to compassion and everything was still growing and strong. So that fear, that future loneliness was a little bit there before Timothy died. And in a sense, it was a little bit there afterwards. I don't remember it being such an extreme part, but I know it was there. And the guilt, I still, unto this day, have the guilt. The guilt that I have is that why didn't I bring him home? Then there's those physical reactions of how our body, sometimes we don't get, last night I couldn't sleep. I was so tired, but I couldn't sleep because I was still feeling some of that anxiety and some of that fear that's still deep down inside of me that I need to pour out and and speak about it. In a sense, I do. Thank you guys for letting me talk about it. But I know that many, many go through the same thing. And it's worse when you're a single parent and you only had one child. But you see, I knew he was going to die. So when he passed away, it was like how, you hold a deep breath and all your muscles are tightened. And that's why your body's reacting the way it does when you get sick. It's because you have this fear, you have this stress, and you have this anxiety, and your body's like hardened up. And it's a reason why you have anxiety and you can't breathe, because you tighten. The fear has surrounded you. The anxiety and the stress is holding you when you deal with anticipatory grief. But as soon as they pass away, it's like suddenly you can breathe. We need to remember to do personal self-care. That's very, very important. Taking care of yourself and before. And and I also would suggest to continue to either talk with a grief coach or go get therapy, because even after the death, mentally you're going to need someone to talk to. If it's not somebody professional, do with somebody that you can trust and that will listen to you, but also that will be there as a comfort for you. Be a comfort. So one of the things I wanted to bring up before I forget. Well, we're getting a free concert. Sorry, somebody had the volume of the radio on their car so loud it was booming. My whole apartment was shaking. No, I forgot what I was going to say. Oh, the family surroundings. One of the things I suggested in my podcast last year that I remember, when you're dealing with anxiety, grief, and you have a family, it is good for the whole family, including the one that's got the illness, to come together and talk and feel get the sense of the feeling of what each member is going through. And remember, everybody grieves differently. Not everybody's going to grieve the same. Some people are going to act like they're not grieving. But I can assure you that they are. They're just hiding it. But don't press them. Don't push them. But encourage them to talk about it. Okay? Encourage them to talk about it, because that is really important. And then educate yourself and speak with friends or family how you're feeling, and make sure your children are equipped to handle the loss. And I just heard caller talk about it right before me, and she had a wonderful segment in the books that she wrote for children to help them to deal with the loss. And I, I, I'm sure you're gonna, if you haven't heard it by now, I'm sure they're gonna repeat it on the Facebook and probably the YouTube. It was a wonderful segment to help children deal with loss, and it's just not. Let's say it's a child that's dying. Just remember, it's just not the mother that's going to be emotionally drained of pain and grief. The dad will too, and the children will too. So we need to remember that when they're all dealing with this anticipatory grief, that we need to minister to the whole family and make sure that you find support in your community. And like I said, seek professional help if you need to. And talk candidly with the person who's died. And I did this with Timothy. It was very hard to do it with Judy, but Judy knew. Judy was a faithful Catholic. I mean, I wish I had time to tell you the story about Judy, but Judy still, I would go into the room to check on her. She would be on her knees praying. She knew what was going to happen to herself, but she was praying for her daughters. She was praying for her ex-husband. She was praying for her brothers and their family. She prayed until her mind, didn't know how to help her. But I would bring her to church with me. And she loved coming to church with me. And she loved when the church family acknowledged her and embraced her. And the one time we had a potluck, she suddenly disappeared on me. It's like, where are you? And I'm looking around. And before I knew it, I had a mic in my hand. Silver alert! We couldn't find Judy. She had somehow sneaked out and was walking down the 39th Street. And thank God we had a church member who found her and walked back with her, and they had a good talk. So, everybody, when you get to know somebody that you love and care about, it's just amazing how that support is there. So talk candidly with the person that is dying if they're able to comprehend and understand, but spend time together and make sure you make those memories, because that's the most important thing. That is the important thing, that children do go through grief, even when they're watching it. And remember, if and when that child should pass away, minister to the whole family for comfort. Minister to them for comfort. So I am thankful. I'm going to see if there are any comments here, because the last few times I forgot. Yes, Josh, that's right. Connections to others make grief very different and difficult. It depends who you have in the connections others to. Because if you have a good comfort or a good support system, whether it's church family or your close friends or even some relatives, it may be different and it may be difficult, but it depends on your relationship with them and their relationship with you, that you would know what could be different or what could be difficult. So yes, even family traditions can make the bond stronger. And that's why I say, make sure if this is a family that everybody comes together and not talk about it once. Come together as a family support. Maybe to watch movies together, but or maybe to worship, but come and talk about it. Express, because I think that will help relieve some of the stresses, the fear, and the anxiety. Okay? Because I know it's tightening, isn't it? When you're all stressed and and the fear is surrounded, its arms around you, and you feel, I can't breathe anymore. It will do that to you. That's why they tell you to take care of yourself. Take care of yourself first so that you are healthy and strong, and the person that you're a caregiver to or who you have anticipatory grief with will appreciate you being there for that comfort. It's I really believe that one day when there's more education and more training for the community in whole, the society in whole, but when you have that, especially with your church family, my stepmom, she was very good at being there for my dad, but she was very good. Back to my effective comforter becoming, her church family, her community was very good in surrounding her with comfort and love. And that's why, Josh, it's very important to have that bond with your family. And I feel like at times I did not with my family. And I think they saw grief as the way society taught them. They couldn't see me as a new person. Yes, I changed because when there's a death of a loved one, especially of a child, you do change. But they didn't see me change as a positive person. Okay? They only saw me as the person that dealt with depression years ago. They were afraid to take off their blindfolds to see me as a new and different person. And that's not my problem. That's their problem. And all I can do is pray for them. That's all I can do is pray for them. So I hope that if you go to my website, I think I'm teaching a class. I'm trying to remember all the classes I'm teaching. So I think true, Josh, kind of being Brandon. Yes, that is very, very true. And that's a good way to say it. So thank you for saying that. But go to my website, and I think I have a class I'll be teaching it because I feel it's really important that we as a family and church family and friends need to have that kind of bond, that like being bonded together. And we need to understand how to be there for someone. You know, I always feel bad when I find out somebody from my church died and I didn't even know that they were sick or in the hospital or anything like that. Because I would have been happy to be there to show that support and that comfort. But if I don't know about it, I can't bring it. So I pray that the classes, the courses I'm teaching will help educate and train people to understand what many of us has gone through or what many are currently still going through. And all I can say is pray for them. Don't just pray for the person who's dying, but pray for the family. Pray for the caregivers. Because even the nurses that came and took care of Tim, they too, because Timothy was a very good person to be friends with. I mean, to hear him laughing with the nurses, and I remember his last birthday, his nurses bought him a birthday cake. I think it was a cupcake. But they had that bond. They knew who he was. They loved his laugh. Valerie would bring her dog. So there was that bond. So even the nurses who come and care, they also are dealing with anticipatory grief, even if they deal with it on a daily basis. But I'm sure when they go home, somehow I'm hoping they're releasing that stress and that anxiety by letting it expressing your feelings. Because we are humans and we love and care for each other. So my website that you can go and check out, www.unpluggedgrief.org, and you can see what we have to offer. I am still updating the website. It is completed, but sometimes my mind rolls and I say, I need to add this. So, come back daily to see some new things. But the class, anticipatory grief, how to become an effective comforter, and I think there's another one, when children grieve, and I think there's one more. So this summer is going to be full of different courses. if people want to really come in and learn how to express their feelings that they need to express. And again, and this is another book that will also help you with this. Dr. Wright, when he says this is also a good book to use for anticipatory grief. All right. And he has several other books as well. I believe Gary Cole also has some books. And Clara Hinton might, but they all have wonderful books that help you. But I believe this, as many times as I read this, that's why I keep thinking, but I may be confused with one of his other books. And I love Dr. Wright because not only because he's a professional, licensed clinical therapist, professor, whatever, but because he has a good Christian knowledge of comforting people and helping people through the crisis. That's what he calls it. When you're going through anticipatory grief, in a sense, it's crisis. So, again, thank you. I hope you have a wonderful day. Hey, we're still here at the Virtual Global Grief Conference. The day is coming to an end, but we still have many workshops, podcasts, and panels and seminars that are coming up. Wonderful speakers that are coming in to speak more with you, not only today, but all day tomorrow. You can't miss this. It's a wonderful thing that we have. Josh and Nathan has been doing a wonderful job in the background, and Tony and I trying our best as we host and co-host this wonderful conference, and we hope that it brings much blessings to you. But most of all, remember something that I learned the other day. Grief is a teacher. Grief will teach you a lot. Grief teaches you a lot before it actually explodes to become a real grief. But it teaches you more after you have the loss. And it's just a matter of when you're ready to listen to it. But here at the Virtual Global Grief Conference, we're here because we are here under the spirit of healing. That's what we want for you and for everybody. Thank you for coming. I appreciate you being a good support for everybody here and listening and learning. Hey, I'm going to a lot of these classes too, and you'd be surprised how much I'm learning. I'm just like, what's the right word? Elated? No, maybe that would not be the right word. Excited that this weekend is like a weekend of our conference is like a little school teaching you a lot of wonderful things. So have a wonderful Saturday and rest what's remaining of it, and then have a wonderful weekend. And thank you for joining me today. Be good, stay safe, and stay alive.